Going on next, an interview with a former member of one of the most interesting bands of the last 35 years for sure. He was a co-writer and co-vocalist on many of this iconic band's biggest hits, including a poignant song that he wrote about his hero, a legendary figure of rock history. And then amazingly, years after he released the song, that legend invited him to his concert and he played the song for him in the front row. He also tells the story of his former band's most iconic hit. It happened to be the very first song he ever wrote with his frequent collaborator in the band. They were actually camp counselors together, and on a bus ride home from camp, they wrote the song in just a few minutes. It was a silly little thing, but it ended up helping them sell millions of records, which is kind of ironic. You'll find out why. And it helped them get pelted with mac and cheese whenever they played it live. The interview's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever recorded songs off the radio on your boombox, back in the day, hoping the DJ wouldn't talk over the song, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. Click the white button and click the bell so you always know when our latest and greatest come out. We have some really good interviews coming out and some good stuff. Also, remember to check us out at professorofrock.com for more content. So it's time for another edition of our series Revelations, where featured artists reveal rare stories about their greatest songs and greatest albums. On this installment of Revelations, we sit down with Stephen Page, formerly of Barenaked Ladies. He wrote or co-wrote some of the band's biggest hits, including my favorite, Brian Wilson, the father of 60s pop and the genius behind the Beach Boys' biggest hits.
Lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson did.
The tribute came full circle when Brian Wilson invited him over and played it for him.
And singing fun, 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 lying in bed.
And the story of If I Had $1 Million, which actually was written as a joke on a bus ride with Ed Robertson. They were camp counselors. It was the first song they ever wrote together and ended up being their signature song.
I had $1 million if I had $1 million times.
And an excuse for fans to pelt them with mac and cheese at live shows. Find out why? The interview's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Let's talk about one of the most tender pop songs ever. Brian Wilson.
I'm lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson did.
I love that song. That made me an instant fan because I felt the way that you felt about, it just spoke to me and it spoke to fans about what you really feel about Brian Wilson's music, that magic, those harmonies.
Every kiss was never ending.
People can write about it. I've written articles, I've written books where they capture kind of that, but nobody's really been able to capture it in the song, that love for Brian Wilson and for what he did.
Listening and re-listening, smiley smile.
So that hit number 18 in Canada, charted here in the US, and of course Brian himself covered it.
If you wanna find me, I'll be out in my sandbox.
My appreciation for him and for the Beach Boys was new at that point. I was in university and I had a pal there that was a huge Beach Boys fan. And I grew up a huge Beatles fan and been a fan of all kinds of, indie music and folk music and whatever else. And I kind of always saw the Beach Boys as, it's amazing now, the kind of comparison to my band, not that I want to put them on the same level, but the sense that I always saw them as kind of lightweight, as kind of like throwaway and maybe a little dumb, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s when it was, it was that sense of, America's band, the bicentennial endless summer kind of thing that was, I didn't understand and I knew nothing about the kind of what I think is the prime era from Good Vibrations to the early 70s.
It was surf music, and that's kind of how I felt too.
It felt like it was
the Beatles were way up here.
That's right, exploring new
12
places.
or 13 when I was hearing that, that's what I thought. But then, you're right, you understand.
And in those early Beach Boys records, even like lyrically, their approach to heartbreak and romance was very simplistic compared to the much more complex way that people like the Beatles did. Like, John Lennon's songs are full of anger and angst and complexity. And there's guilt and there's all kinds of other things. And these are very simplistic. But I had this friend and he made me a tape, because I was like, forget the Beach Boys. And he made me a tape of stuff from the whole career, but stuff I wouldn't have heard before. And I kind of it blew my mind open. And he told me the whole story. And then at that point, I started to obsess and really got into it. And, and trying to find as many bootlegs as I could. Of course, we're in a much richer world now. And for a lot of these kind of great artists where we're able to hear all the legendary outtakes and remixes and different versions and demos and so on that we had to search like crazy for 30 years ago.
Or the vocals only pet sounds, like where it just blows your mind.
Exactly.
God only knows what I'd be without you.
When you hear that stuff, and that's the other thing about some of those vocals, that kind of Four Freshmen style that he was inspired by, is pretty square. When you're a kid growing up, it didn't have, there's almost no edge to it. But as you become more sophisticated in your listening, or for me as a musician, or when we had 5 guys in a band who could sing, and you realize once you have 5 voices there and not a standard triad, you start finding other notes. And sometimes those notes are moving, sometimes those notes are dissonant. And that's what the Beach Boys provided, was this amazing inspiration on the harmony level. In general, the vision for what pop music could be, which was and is Brian's, was so remarkable to me.
Yeah.
And you hear the stories, and back then, the stories about Brian being in bed and the excesses of the 70s and so on. They were kind of a joke in rock and roll. It was like he was wacky. It was it was another way of telling the Orson Welles story or something like that.
Like on Saturday Night Live when they got him his bathrobe.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, here's your wave.
That kind of thing. And, you look at it later, I looked at it at the time, and even then I was 19, 20 when I was writing this song, and I wasn't aware that my own mental health struggles, my struggles with depression were something to even consider. That I thought everybody felt the way I felt. I didn't realize that it was a serious thing, but I did understand and relate to his own struggle. And he's often minimized his own struggle, which I think is a generational thing. And I try to kind of put that, the biggest thing for me was that his music is often so positive and so hopeful, optimistic. And for me, at that age, especially, the idea of listening to music, going to a record store and rifling through stuff and learning stuff, that was my therapy. That was the way to lift myself out of darkness, was through music, and it still is. I floated till I couldn't see the ground. And I think that's the thing about that song, was that it relates my affection for him and his music to the ability for music to lift anybody out of something.
Like Love and Mercy and some of those songs that he wrote. Even, when he got out of bed and he started recording again.
Right.
So many years spent running away.
I mean, those are songs that he's just opening a part of his heart.
Right.
And that's what you did with your vocal on that song. There's a reverence there. There's just a tenderness. But I want to ask you about, because you wrote it in your parents' basement when you're, I think, 20th birthday or
something around there.
Somewhere around there. But first verse chronicling your late night journeys to Sam the Record Man.
Yep.
Just to check out the late night record shop.
That's cool that you did that, because years later now, most record stores are closed, including Sam the Record Man. So there's even that melancholy there of that as well. Generally tells a story of a man that's similar to Brian Wilson, talks about Eugene Landy and the Sandbox.
If you wanna find me, I'll be out in the sandbox.
When I heard that, I started listening more to Brian Wilson and everything, and that made me go after Smile and listen to Smile.
Of course.
And you have that in there. You have those little moments. Is that something that you were, how did that come about?
Yeah, that was something that I was on at that point, was trying to pursue, stitching together on a tape whatever I could of what Smile might have been, because at that point they hadn't released anything. So there were bootlegs, which were harder to find. And then there was the stuff that showed up on different records that were either re-records or outtakes from Smile. So that was an obsession of mine at the time. You know, Sam the Record Man was this great record store in downtown Toronto that was huge and had an amazing selection. It wasn't until like I started traveling the world. I used to go to record stores in every town, and I started to think this might still actually be the best record store out there. The selection was that good. And it was kind of my affection for music was part of my identity. It was part of who I was. And at that point, I wasn't identifying myself as a musician yet. You know, I was in the band because I loved it, but I never felt that I was good enough at anything to be a musician. So I really saw myself as a music fan first and foremost. And that's what that song kind of brought about. It's funny when Brian Wilson recorded it, he played his version for us.
Yeah, he visited you guys when you recorded Maroon, right?
That's right. We were making Maroon at what was then Cello Studio. But it's where they made Pet Sounds. It was in Studio 3 there. And we got to work one morning, and Don Was, who was producing the record, said, "Guys, I got a surprise for you." And we go into the studio, and Brian Wilson comes in. And we're like, wow. And they put a CDR in the player, and he plays his version of my song about him.
Lying in bed like Brian Wilson did.
And then it came to the part where he says, playing my piano, and he says, "I don't play guitar." He just turned to me and said, "I play piano."
Playing my piano and building castles in the sun.
Because I said playing my guitar, but I was talking about myself.
I'm playing my guitar and building castles in.
He was saying, he asked, what I read is, "Guys, is it cool?" You know?
Yeah, that's what he said when it was over. "Is it cool?" I was like, "Yeah, it's cool." It's cool.
Lying in bed like Brian Wilson did.
I got to meet him a few other times since then, and one of the greatest things ever, you're talking about singing about Love and Mercy. I got to go up on stage with him and his band and sing Love and Mercy and Fun, 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 which you
name
I
checking
name checking the song, and then one of my favorite songs of all time.
And saying fun, fun, fun. I'm lying in bed.
It was just such a huge thrill. And that was a show where it was in Toronto, and I knew he was playing our song in the set, but we got there sitting at this amphitheater, and every musician I know in town is there, and the show starts with the song, Brian Wilson.
Jeez.
Like, what do you do at that point? Everybody looks over like at me, and I didn't know whether to hide or like wave or what.
Lying in bed like Brian Wilson did.
If I had $1 million, I mean, this is a song that has meant so much to so many different fans, Barenaked Ladies fans. Everybody has a different story about, how they discovered it, what it means to them, and of course, how you guys sing it live.
If I had $1 million, if I had $1 million.
That was never really officially a single, though it did chart, but didn't have a music video. I mean, this was one of those songs that seems like everybody found on their own, Tell me about that, because you guys wrote it as camp counselors.
Yep. It's the first song that Ed and I ever wrote together. I think on the bus ride home from camp, he sang it, like he kind of made it up off the top of his head to the campers, and then like the next day told me about it, played it for me, and it is what you hear. Like he sang his part, and I sang my response to him, and then the song was done.
If I had $1 million, well, I'd buy you a house.
The version that's on Gordon, I mean, it's different than the one on the yellow tape. They're all different because all the chatter, the banter in between sections was always improvised. And when we recorded it for Gordon, our producer, Michael Philip Voivoda, just said, do 5 takes and then leave, and I'll go through them and I'll choose what I think the best one is.
Pre-wrapped sausages, but they don't have pre-wrapped bacon.
Well, can you blame them?
Yeah.
What's on there with the pre-wrapped bacon and stuff is just because that's what I said that time in the take that Michael chose.
No kidding.
But they become the words. And it's one of those songs that for us, we were 18. It was our first song we'd ever written. It's a great song, I realize now, but at the time, for years afterwards, I think we were kind of embarrassed by it.
Well, I'd buy you an exotic pet. Yep, like a llama.
And I remember once in around like the early 2000s doing one of those AOL chat things. Like it was a moderated chat where people could, come in like an AMA today. And one of the questions that somebody asked was, "What's your favorite song of your own?" And we all listed off kind of these, more artsy or adventurous songs, whatever else. And Jim Cregan said, $1 million. And we laughed, like we were crying laughing, thinking $1 million of all songs. This is a song that, our label Reprise in the US was bugging us to make a single for years, like years after, like albums after. We're like, that's not on this album. We're not going to put it out now. And it was kind of a cultural phenomenon for the cult of fans, throwing macaroni and cheese at us at the stage
the
and
craft
stuff.
dinner, yep.
Wouldn't have to eat craft dinner, but we would.
But it was the kind of thing where we felt like, we're better songwriters now, we're more serious songwriters. It's kind of a novelty song, and it's so easy. We knew it was a big part of the live show and we weren't going to stop doing it, but we didn't necessarily want to always be associated or connected purely with that song.
Sing along with Steve Page. Here we go. I'm Steve Page. Here we go.
Jim explained to us, he said, this is a song that everybody knows, like grandmothers know it and families sing it, and it's a soundtrack to people's lives. It's like he's like, you guys wrote a campfire song. And we realized he's absolutely right. Like that is what a gift to us, that a song like that can have a life that doesn't have anything to do with any of the guys in the band. It's just a song that's in people's lives. And it's a silly song, but there's so much space in life for silly songs.
If I had $1 million.
Sometimes that's where memories are stored.
But the thing about you guys, original Barenaked Ladies, is that you guys have something. I mean, there's a lot of bands that have done the tongue-in-cheek stuff and the funny stuff. There's They Might Be Giants and a lot of bands like that. What's different about you guys is that you have that humor, but you have like a sense of melancholy and tenderness that you can't put your finger on it. You can't point out to one lyric. There's the witty, there's all those things put together that make it completely unique and different. And
nice.
For me, like that's what it was. It was that part. You can have a Brian Wilson, but even $1 Million, that's a song like that where it's like campfire song is a great way to put it, but it's like an American standard, years later. I mean, Cole Porter wrote songs like that were like, that people thought were kind of tongue in cheek or,
and he churned them out. He churned out some of the best songs ever written.
Yeah.
And the best turns of phrase. And
yeah.
It's great. And I think one of the nice things about it too that makes me feel good about it is it's very true to who we were at that time.
Sometimes we do a little warm up before the gig. Usually just go something like.
And it just reflected how we related to each other on stage and off.
There's food there. Mustard. Always do mustard. Condiments.
Well, the improv and the banter has just become legendary from all the shows. I mean, everybody tries to collect the different versions because every night it was something different.
And I don't feel guilty this time. Usually we play a venue like this and I end up cutting. By the time I'm on stage, I feel so racked with guilt because of the food I've eaten.
I'm gonna throw up sour milk. It could be on your shoes.
The craft dinner thrown on the stage, I mean, that became something of, it's like when they were throwing flowers for Morrissey, craft dinner became you guys' thing. And then you had to kind of say, let's donate this, or let's do a food bank or something, because it was getting kind of smelly and you're getting pelted by craft dinner.
Right. I mean, it was really fun for a while, but everything's like, I remember being in clubs, like really sweaty clubs, and someone would like open up the cheese packet and throw it and stick to my sweaty t-shirt. It was reek of cheese. Then as the venues started to get bigger, we started playing hockey arenas and stuff, and people would be way up in the top throwing it, thinking somehow it was going to end up on the stage and would nail some kid down on the floor. You think, we can't have that.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing for us was like all this food that's being brought here for a joke, that's great. But let's, like, if we started frisking people for it because people were getting hurt. But then we thought, well, if we use it as an opportunity to have a food drive everywhere, then great.
Well, voted number 2 in the most essential songs in the CBC poll a few years ago, and then on an episode of Scrubs. Did you see how they used that?
Pudding, score! Come on, let's go!
In Safe Go Phil, they would use it when A-Rod would come to bat after he left them. But when you become a Ben and Jerry's, If I had a million flavors, I mean, Jerry Garcia's got one. You guys have one. That must have been pretty cool.
It was pretty awesome.
And all these songs that we've just been talking about, of course, on several albums, but on Gordon, which I want to point out that Gordon, you guys just got inducted in the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. But Gordon is a diamond album in Canada. I mean, that's huge. You know?
There's like a million records, which is the equivalent of like selling 10 million in the US.
Absolutely. That's a huge honor.
Yeah, and it took a long time. Like it was one of those, it was a big sensation in Canada and was kind of nothing here in the United States. But it eventually went gold in the US as well.
Yeah, because it grew. Yep. It was being passed on. Like
right.
Me and my friends, we were passing each other. Check this out. If I had $1 million. Looking back on your life up to this point, your personal life and your career, what are you most grateful for in this moment right now?
The fact that I've been able to do this for 30 years, like this has been my job, writing songs and singing them in front of audiences and recording them, which I love to do. I mean, lots of stuff is hard. And I take my job seriously and, you know, I work hard on stage and whatever else, but I love it. And the fact that these people come and they come, it is the best thing you could hope for. Yes, they come for nostalgia and they come to hear the old stuff and they want to catch up with the new stuff. It's like getting together with an old friend. I'm so grateful for that because I can only say that I've done this for 30 years because people keep coming. If they didn't come, I couldn't do this. And they do. And I'm deeply grateful for it.
Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Stephen Page and his work with Barenaked Ladies. What are your memories of these songs? You ever seen them live? Great band, and Stephen Page, great songwriter. Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.